Okay, hi everyone, thanks for that. I feel like whenever I go to one of these events, there's a shopping list of really bad issues with the specific law that we're talking about, but it always starts or ends with the same thing, which is that we don't have a Bill of Rights or a Human Rights Act in New South Wales or on a federal level. So my question is probably for David, the politician. How do we pragmatically get to the point where New South Wales has a Human Rights Act? And if we were to make it to that point, do you actually think that it would make a difference looking at the experience interstate?
Well, absolutely would make a difference. I mean, you look at the political culture and the police culture in the ACT where they have a Bill of Rights, and it's fundamentally different. I had the good fortune of having somebody work in my office for a maternity leave position who'd been a prosecutor in the ACT and I thought it was all a bit soft, and then came and was a prosecutor in New South Wales and couldn't believe the difference. Because in the ACT, she'd seen magistrates and judges giving the prosecution a hard time. And then she came across to New South Wales and she realised you didn't have to do anything as a prosecutor. You just basically stood up and said, well, these are the judges, and then bang, you sat down and the court was having a real red-hot go at the defence from the outset. There's definitely a different culture in the legal in our legal structure, but also in our legislature in New South Wales, which doesn't involve looking at human rights. The culture is quite different in the ACT where they have a human rights bill. Victoria's the same. The human rights bill in Victoria actually requires the Parliament to seriously engage with human rights when they're putting through legislation that infringes upon human rights, and it has a meaningful outcome. We're not seeing these same rafts of laws passing through the Victorian legislature. New South Wales has a legislative review committee whacked in by Bob Carr when he was opposing a human rights bill in the 1990s. And I'm a member of the legislative review committee, and it would have to be one of the more embarrassing functions I have as a parliamentarian. It's dominated by the government. Meetings where they can consider 3, 4, 5 or 6 bills involving substantial human rights breaches can be finished in 2 minutes or 1 minute. They only go longer than that if I decide to move an amendment and actually try and debate something. I'll move an amendment and suggest that we should have a slightly tougher view on a particular bill. I'll speak to it. They'll wait for me to finish, and then nobody else will speak, and the government chair will say, "I'll put that amendment. It's lost." That's it. And these meetings of the Legislative Review Committee can go for less than a minute, as they just ran through the agenda. So how do we change it? Well, I think Stephen's idea about talking about fundamental freedoms, rather than some kind of abstract human rights construct or the ICCPR or whatever, we need to start talking about our fundamental freedoms that are at risk, and what do we need and what structures do we need to ensure that our fundamental freedoms remain. I think the protest laws and the passage of the anti-protest laws has been a bit of a wake-up call for broader society. It really had a bigger impact and a bigger feel across Middle Australia than I think the government thought. That being said, they got their protest laws through, and then they whacked in the public safety orders, and now they've whacked in preventative detention. I think the government thinks it can get pretty much whatever it wants out of the legislature. So I do think that when they eventually do gazette the protest laws and give these new move-on powers in order to break up protests, that's when we're going to have, and I think the woman at the back, the Kamura woman at the back, made the point. We're going to have thousands of citizens come out and stare the police down. That's what it's going to take. And that then is going to start generating the broader discussion and think, well, hang on, if 5,000 people have come out and stood the police down and said that they're not going to be moved on for this protest, well, then that's going to make it into Middle Australia, and that's when we're going to start generating the discussion for fundamental freedoms.
The day these bills are being debated, I encourage anyone to join me out the front.
From a bike club perspective, the experience of bike clubs in places like the ACT in Victoria is not that different to other places. So even though they have that Bill of Rights, the effect on the ground, I'm not quite sure exactly the mechanisms that are being used there. I'm not across all that, but I don't think it's necessarily easier to be in a club in those places than New Zealand.
Well, the cleverness, if you like, of parliamentarians who have been pushing these laws is they paint anyone who's a member of a bicycle club as the other. And so they think they can get away with pretty much...
Motorbike club.
Motorbike. They paint someone as a motorbike club. Well, I'll tell you what, in New South Wales they paint bicycle clubs as the other as well. But they paint them as the other. and then they feel like can marginalise them and impose these restrictions on them. It's when the laws start moving, the application laws start moving beyond the standard marginalised groups and the other, and start impacting upon Middle Australia, that we're going to have a movement, I think. And that's when we're going to generate a push for a human rights bill. Unfortunately, it has to get a bit uglier before it gets better, I think.
Do we have time for any further comments from the panel on that issue?
One practical observation, I say this with not my Law Society hat on, but my status as a member of the South Sydney Football Club. The public safety orders also apply to sporting events, and if the government or if a New South Wales Police Force officer were to impose a public safety order on a public event, a cultural event, a sporting event, it would, I think, demonstrate to a wide range of people just what has been made lawful.
Unless it's the Western Sydney Wanderers, when it seems to be okay.
I think on that note, I know there are lots more questions. A couple more? You want to go one more? Okay. Yeah, someone who hasn't asked a question yet. Yep, we'll go with you. Yep. Yes, yes.
Yeah, look, I'm really concerned from a number of, I can see this moving. So as a TAFE teacher who's worked with young people at risk, I could see that these laws are going to impact on the most marginalised. As an organiser of Stop TAFE Cuts demos around the state, I can see that these will be used against unions. We're in a situation where we've got this government here until 2019, and we've got them privatising just about every public service, including education. And today we learned that, of course, jails being privatised. And I mean, my God, that's a no-brainer, isn't it? You know, if you privatise jails, well, they're going to grow. And today we learned that they're taking all the teachers out of the jails, and that's going to be outsourced and privatised as well. So every education teacher in jails in New South Wales is about to lose their jobs, or the majority of them anyway. I'm listening to the civil disobedience, and I think that that needs to be organised. And I'm also wondering if, considering the contravention of the human rights of a child, whether there's any, at least any room to go to the United Nations Human Rights Commission around, you know, breaching the rights of the child.
I'm sure the panel will leap on that question.
Yes, well, of course, there are lots of opportunities and occasions to engage with the United Nations over a lengthy period of time. It's not something that can be done overnight, but there are regular reviews of Australia's performance by the United Nations under the various human rights treaties that we're signed up to, and there is opportunity for community organisations to provide information to the United Nations different from what the government says to them. And they do take that seriously. The problem is, of course, the Australian governments, no Australian government takes seriously any criticism that any of the United Nations committees might make. And so it tends to be a bit of a pointless exercise. You raised civil disobedience, which is on the top of my mind at the moment, because I did quite a long interview on ABC Country Radio yesterday on that subject, and it is just fascinating how much current civil disobedience activity is going on, and I can only see that area expanding. And we have the situation in Tasmania where Bob Brown was arrested with others under some very draconian anti-free speech, anti-protest laws. That's going to be challenged in the High Court. We've got the Pilliga protesters here and other CSG campaigners who are engaged in civil disobedience to some extent. We had the Newcastle protest last weekend, you know, if we want to look wider than just our own environment, look at France, where they have a state of national emergency which prohibits all public assemblies, and the result of that is in every town and city in France, every night there is a public assembly in protest. So if you want to generate protest, you just, the first step is you have to have draconian laws that incentivise people to protest against them. So I think if one wants to take a positive message away tonight, the laws that have just gone through New South Wales Parliament are so draconian that a backlash from the community, I think, is inevitable.
Anyone out do that last statement?
But I'll pull a quote from Philip here. I saw him at the protest laws. He had a little sign, quite a substantial sign, and he says, "You've got to fight for your right to fight for your rights." And that's the fight at the moment. But one thing I think the legal class could do, and seriously engage in over the next 6 months, and I'm looking at you, Stephen, and Leslie and others, is actually develop a model bill for human rights in New South Wales that we can all get around and campaign behind. Let's get that model bill sorted in the next 6 months, and then let's make it a continual part of our campaigning over the next 3 years, to lead up to the 1919 election, so as we can try and get a commitment. And the other thing is, you know, this may sound partisan, but don't vote for parties that don't support human rights.
I think on that we will wind up. Again, I know there are more questions, but these discussions are going to continue. On those two positive notes, and civil disobedience has been a topic amongst us for some time now, and I think Stephen is right. I think there will be a fair bit more of it in the next not too distant future. And I think, David, the notion of a model bill. And again, interestingly, we have made in New South Wales Civil Liberties pushing at a state level for a human rights bill one of our top priorities for the same kinds of reasons. Where else do we go when Parliament lets us down so often? Can I thank the four speakers for a really interesting set of male perspectives on these issues, and as always, a huge thanks to David Shoebrodge and his extraordinary office, Kim and others, for, in the middle of a week of absolute turmoil, well, nonetheless managing to get this event happening. Thank you.